Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alastair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's Alien Invasion special, we'll be defending Earth from a whole universe of superheroes, including our father's alien race, in the 4th season of Invincible, and then defending Earth from invading xenomorphs in new comic Aliens Vs Avengers. But before all of that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners, and does it involve alien invasions?
No, actually it is a comic, but I have steered away from the alien invasion theme on this one occasion, which is impressive considering how many comics there are about alien invasions. But yeah, no, the one I'm going to talk about is a book called Golden Age, which has been running for a few years now. It's had a couple of volumes out from Image Comics. This is by Chrissy Williams and Lauren Knight, and it's a Battle Royale, Lord of the Flies, dystopian fight to the death on an island type story, except the big twist, I guess, is that the characters on this island are all older women. The vibe appears to be that society has decided that older women are all useless and has exiled them all to this island where they're now fighting to the death for scraps and the chance to survive, and dividing into tribes and doing all the things you normally do in these sort of stories. So yeah, it's a sort of satirical dystopian thing with a bit of sincerity around the characters. And yeah, I went to a comics panel discussion event with a few writers talking about their work, including podcast favourite Kieran Gillen a few weeks ago. And Chrissy Williams was also on the panel talking about Golden Age, and it sounded good, so I have now read all 10 existent issues. And yeah, it's a fun time. It's very, in its genre, it's very much doing that sort of fight to the death on an island thing. You know, as you say, if you've read The Hunger Games or all the things I mentioned earlier, then yeah, it's very familiar in that way. But it's interesting how the demographic they're using, because I think a lot of the stories I've mentioned, you know, the key thing they have in common, apart from the setting and the premise, is that they'll often seem to be about, you know, young people. It seems like, you know, it's a young person's game, fighting for your life on a dystopian island. So older women specifically is an interesting twist.
Certainly all the media you mentioned so far is young people, yeah, Lord of the Flies, Hunger Games, Battle Royale. So that is definitely a distinct twist. It sounds like quite a bleak story, to be honest, yeah.
I think one of the interesting things about the characters they're using and the sort of the general tone that it gives the book is there's this vague sense that, you know, maybe women don't feel as obliged to puff themselves up with machismo and go on a killing spree as men might in that scenario, or as younger people might in that scenario. So there's a certain amount of pragmatism around this to an extent. And obviously, you know, it's a dystopian kill book. There is eventually some blood and some killing, but it doesn't quite give you the vibe that the book desperately wants to get to the blood and the killing. Obviously there are some antagonists who are a bit more keen on all that than our main characters who are just trying to get by and survive. But yeah, it's interesting, and you know, it has even though it's, you know, it's confined to that specific demographic, it has an interesting range of characters. There's a Russian woman, there's a slightly younger than the rest woman who's going through early menopause, there's a sort of lovable, friendly old grandma type woman who seems very disconcerted by the carnage around her. And yeah, it's fun. It's very likeable.
Yeah, sounds good. It sounds good. So is this a writer who you've read their stuff before, or is it a new writer to you?
I think this is their first direct market genre comic, their first one that I think I've seen get much publicity and attention. I think they've done a few sort of indie small pressy things before, like I think sort of poetry comics and stuff, but this is their first genre story. So yeah, as I say, I saw them on this panel and it vaguely popped as something I'd been meaning to read for a while, and perhaps it's time to finally crack on.
Sounds good. And you said you've read 10 issues. I assume it's not wrapped up at the end of those 10 issues.
No, it doesn't feel entirely wrapped up. It feels like, I don't know what Chrissy Williams has in mind. I'm sure it depends on many things like sales and her creative urges, but it could be a trilogy. Yeah, 10 issues is 2 5-issue volumes basically. There's a volume 1 and a volume 2 that they've done, so it could be a trilogy. They could wrap it up with volume 3. It could be a longer series. I'm hoping there'll be at least one more.
Yeah, sounds good. It does sound like an interesting premise, like it has something to say about how society views older women. Yeah, I guess a sort of feminist point, and also a point, I guess, about our culture and beauty standards and things like that.
Yeah, you get to have some pointed chats about those sort of things between the killings, yeah. And yeah, Lauren Knight's art's really good as well. It's a bit looser and less detailed, I think, than you might sometimes get on some of these stories, which I think get a bit obsessed with, you know, really showing every drop of blood and every fleck of splayed out intestine. It's a bit looser, and the cartooning's really good. They're like the expressions and the emotions, which I think really puts across a lot of it. And plus, you know, because she's so good at this sort of conversation and characterization, it does give it a lot more impact when the violence eventually inevitably happens.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the things you kind of want to emphasize with the characters when there's sort of sudden outbursts of violence. I mean, that's one thing that Hunger Games is very good at, as well as Battle Royale.
Yeah, the Hunger Games. I mean, part of it is, I guess, it works quite well in the past when they've done it with teens, is because I guess for teenagers everything is very intense and they're a bit prone to splitting up into into like tribes anyway, or and stuff like that. But again, it just means that by not doing it with teens, it does at least mean that things feel a bit different and a bit distinct. And, it's interesting in some ways to see in what ways they end up going the way of the teens anyway.
Yeah, I guess so. And also maybe they're making a point about, humanity is tribal and we like to exclude people and band together against other people and things like that. So maybe some of these things are sort of universal. It's just there's only certain places where we're sort of like allowed to unleash this very tribalistic side of us, and like the sort of bear pit that is most high schools is sort of one of them. And I guess so is the sort of dystopian murder island.
Yeah, and sadly, many of us will never get to visit a dystopian murder island, so that's get it all out of our system, and that's why we have aspirational stories like Golden Age.
Yeah. I don't think I'd do well on the dystopian murder island. I think I'd be killed quite quickly.
I don't think I'd do well at all, if only because I am a glasses wearer with very, very bad natural vision. So, once the glasses are gone, I imagine so am I very quickly.
Yeah. Also, can imagine that'd be an issue for a sort of island full of older people, I guess, as well. The amount of people I know who are my age who have bad backs, bad knees, things like that. Yeah. Probably not very good at running or fighting.
Yep, guilty. Anyway, Alastair, what exciting media have you been consuming in the last 2 weeks?
So I'm continuing my Studio Ghibli exploration of films I hadn't seen before. After a couple of high-profile ones, maybe a little embarrassing to admit that I haven't seen before, I'm going for one that is, I'd say, more obscure, but it's definitely one of the better regarded ones. So I've watched, apologies for problems with pronunciation here, Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind. This is from 1984, so it's pretty early. In fact, I think this is technically not a Studio Ghibli film. It is directed by Miyazaki. I think this was actually made before the studio was founded. There seems to be some dispute online whether it counts as pre-Studio Ghibli or not at all. But anyway, the list I found at IMDb listing the Studio Ghibli films did include this. And it's got over an 8 out of 10 on IMDb. It's definitely worth watching. I can highly recommend it. Obviously, it's got the elements that we really love from your Studio Ghibli and Miyazaki films, in that it's sort of fantastical world, lots of beautiful natural scenes, lots of interesting creatures and stuff. This one takes place after sort of the collapse of industrial civilization, some kind of apocalypse type things, and people live a more pastoral medieval existence, but there are still sort of bits of military, especially technology, floating around. The main character is a sort of princess of this group who live quite peacefully, and she enjoys flying and has a glider, and sort of everything changes when this sort of huge fleet of giant bombers turn up in her village, and because they want to destroy this lake that is sort of a source of a lot of bugs and nasty things and poisons that they live nearby. And obviously, inevitably, there are twists along the lines of, just because the bugs look nasty and doesn't mean they're bad. It is, so you're really touching on a lot of this Studio Ghibli themes, like, sort of appreciation of nature, these societies that are maybe like, pastoral or sort of pre-industrial, post-industrial in this case. This one feels there's less magic in it and things like that. There are some magical elements, but I guess we're more in a sort of futuristic sci-fi or sci-fi post-apocalyptic settings. So in that case, it feels a bit different to some of the more spiritual ones like Spirited Away, Boy and the Heron, Princess Mononoke, etc.
Yeah, no, I don't think I've heard of this one. It's certainly not been a perennial presence in the culture the way that some of the ones you've mentioned have. Is this one of those ones where you go to see it and you sort of see the early signs of what would later really emerge in later Studio Ghibli films?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is an early one, like I say, 1984, so this film's older than I am. It's a good 13 years or so, I think, before like Princess Mononoke and My Neighbor Totoro. So yeah, it's definitely early work. In fact, one of the first things that usually gets listed chronologically for Studio Ghibli. As you say, you can see a lot of those themes already starting to emerge as sort of like people's relationship with nature and the environment, the kind of spiritual power of the land, which leads to these films that sort of, celebrate nature and, have sort of strong environmental themes. It also just, in some ways, it just feels a lot older, I guess, because it's made in the early 80s, so it feels like something from a different era. It has a slightly odd, although quite good, electro-pop soundtrack, and sort of the weird, electro scores coming in different things, as well as like a full orchestra score that comes in like a big way at moments, which used to be a lot more common in films, and we since sort of the modern vogue used to have music throughout, but sort of more subtly in the background rather than these like big orchestral moments. And a lot of just the sound effects just sound a bit more old-fashioned, or I guess using older equipment. A lot of the sound effects reminded me of the sound effects you also get in like Evangelion cartoon. I guess again it's older, maybe made for a bit less money. So yeah, you can definitely see the sense of where it's coming from, the original things. The animation style, although very beautiful and the characters are richly designed, I guess it feels a bit more old-fashioned, so maybe not quite as vividly detailed as a film like Spirited Away.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess partly it feels like once you got into like the late 90s, early 2000s, things probably start to hit a bit of a quality plateau and start to look a lot more like modern cinema. And also, I guess probably Studio Ghibli probably just had more money.
Yeah, there's, I'm sure, the sense that they get more money, and yeah, there's more animators, more character design, and things like that. Yeah, when you look at the animation style, it feels more like some of those older Disney films, not like the really, really old ones like Dumbo or Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, but like some of the older ones like the Robin Hood one when he's a fox and things like that. It's a similar sort of animation style. I guess that was the way things were done in the past. But it is interesting to dive into this film that's definitely much more of a deep cut, less well known, and to see kind of where a lot of this stuff, sort of themes came from and how things began, the classic earlier work. But just even in its own right, it is just a great film. It's really entertaining. There's some great chase scenes, and the flying is beautifully animated, and you really get this sense of like the wind in the character's hair and like the freedom that comes with flight and things like that. I think there's like several films that deal with flight. I think it's also a film that Miyazaki returns to, a theme so that he returns to, but it is just really great storytelling and has a real sense of like bringing this idea of like freedom and flight to life in a way that's really like clearly communicated through the medium of cinema. So he was still a great storyteller even back in the early days.
Well, yeah, I guess that's true of a lot of people, isn't it? The touch was still there even when they didn't have as much money.
Yeah. Well, the fundamentals, the storytelling, the character design, the sort of magical in the sense of like it's, yeah, I guess we're talking about like a post-industrial society that's got sort of different value systems, and but also this magical in the magical cinema, in that like, you go to a Studio Ghibli film, even watching it at home, you get this experience of these kind of big rush of emotions and the sense of freedom and things like that, and creativity comes through. So he's always had that magic.
Yeah, no, sounds interesting. I'm even further behind my Studio Ghibli watching the new, as discussed several times in previous episodes, but I guess I'll add this to the one-day list.
Yeah, it's worth watching. I think definitely if you've seen the really famous ones, we discussed before, like, as well as the ones mentioned, My Neighbor Totoro, Kiki's Delivery Service, things like that, then it's worth like diving into this old one. And as I keep saying, yep, they're all on Netflix. I do feel Netflix really has a good eye for buying films. They always seem to get films that are like a few years old, but like really good quality and things like that. I mean, they have a huge range of stuff. I'm sure there's a lot of rubbish on there, but like I feel they do collect like a decent selection of good films from a few years ago, so that like, if you're ever scrolling through, there's usually something interesting to watch. And then I was like, oh, they've collected all of these films that are maybe not like hugely mainstream, but are very popular, especially amongst cinephiles. So it's quite nice to think, oh, they're all here, so yeah, I can watch anyone I like whenever I like.
Yeah, no, they added all the Studio Ghiblis a few years ago, didn't they? I remember it being a minor event at the time.
And it's nice. It's good to, especially to work your way through these things. I mean, in the past, you'd have had to purchase some kind of huge DVD box set that probably would have been quite expensive, or wait for like a cinema to do a retrospective season. In fact, there was one just after COVID. I think Picture House did a big Miyazaki Studio Ghibli retrospective, and I remember I booked tickets and then couldn't go because I got COVID. And I guess I saved everyone else on that cinema from catching COVID off me, so there we go.
Cool. Okay, and first up this fortnight, it's time to talk about the 4th season of Invincible, the ongoing adult animation superhero series from Amazon, which we have been following since its beginning during COVID and have pretty consistently enjoyed throughout those first 3 seasons. Over the years, Mark Grayson, a teenage superhero, discovered that his dad, the legendary superhero Omni-Man, who he got his powers from, turned out to be both an alien from another world and also an evil villain who was planning to enslave everybody. So after this came out and he and Mark had a knockdown drag-out brawl, Omni-Man took off for space, where he has stayed for a couple of seasons and ended up slowly redeeming himself with the help of a friendly alien called Alan the Alien. And now this season he finally returns to Earth to try and recruit Mark to go to war against their species, the Viltrumites, to stop them from enslaving the rest of the cosmos. We have seen this 4th season. Alastair, what did you think of it?
Yeah, so they're really upping the emotional ante, I feel. That they've got through 4 seasons, quite a lot of plot, and now they're at the point of paying off some things that have been set up. I get the feeling they're moving towards possibly like a sort of late Act 2, early Act 3 stage of the arc plot. This doesn't strike me as something that will run for like 13 seasons. You never know. They seem to be like aiming for a landing, I don't know, around season 6, season 7. So that means there's a feel they're upping the ante and they're paying off some big emotional moments. And there are some genuine, really, really strong emotional moments in this season that I felt, really, really moving, especially some of the montages that they have that fill in some of the plot moments. There's a montage of mass death on the Viltrumites' homeworld that is, generally quite moving considering they're the villains of the piece. There's also a paranoid fever dream that Mark has about the Viltrums conquering Earth that is quite scary and quite moving. And I feel that they are paying off some big moments in this, like you say, Nolan returning to Earth, confronting some characters he hasn't seen since season 1 when he was revealed that he was a villain. And so these are big emotional moments we've been waiting for a while that they're paying off, and it is certainly landing.
Yeah, I think when we did season 3 of Invincible, I was a bit, I'm still quite enjoying this, but it does feel like they're doing similar things to what they have for the previous 2 seasons. And this season, I did think that, as Alastair kind of said, they took a few steps forward and actually pushed things on a bit, advanced the Uber plots, had characters meet in different configurations to how they had before. Things like, Omni-Man, Nolan returning to Earth and actually having to, see his wife, his ex-wife, I guess, for the first time since he betrayed them, said that he sees her as a pet and then flew away. Those sort of conversations and the advances in Mark's relationship with his girlfriend. It's good, solid soap opera stuff. And as you say, it makes it feel like the Uber plot is advancing because as I've sort of said before and we've covered this, the upside of Invincible and it being this sort of, on the one hand, this expansive superhero universe, but also it's contained within this one series, is that they can actually, push the status quo forward quite substantially and have changes and make them stick. And it actually is a story with a beginning, middle and end. Behind the scenes, I do actually know we're about, I think, pretty much bang on halfway through the story from the comic. It finished at issue 150, and this, I think, is the storyline that ended around the big extra-sized 75th issue. So, we are pretty much bang on halfway. So you are roughly right. It will probably go to about season 7 or 8 at the current pacing.
Yeah. Well, that's, I guess, just gauging the feel from where they are. But, they're definitely at the point of, actually paying some stuff off, which is good. A lot of stuff seems to, have moved on. I think we said in our review of season 3 that this show has as much world building and different plot threads, characters, settings as the entire MCU. There are so many characters and so many stories and a whole universe of superheroes who all kind of have their own sort of different backgrounds and things like that, and it is really, really rich world building. But in this absolute forest of plot, it does feel like they are moving some other things forward as well. Like a lot of stuff that's happened before came back and took big steps forward, such as there's a plot line involving a demon who's a private detective. I felt they paid off some of that. There's a plot line involving a group of criminals who are also super powered and sort of run a gangster crime syndicate thing, and something that feels very reminiscent of what you might get in Batman. They sort of came together under a new leader. It does feel like they're moving some of these plots forward and paying off a whole range of things, in the sense that I get this feeling there is a big plan behind about where all this is going and the kind of endings it's moving towards.
Well, I enjoy the massive combination of genres they do on this. Again, it's clearly somewhat inspired by the writer's enjoyment of the Marvel and DC shared universes, in that you have this world where you've got both sci-fi alien battles and a journey to hell to fight a bunch of demons just happily coexisting, and it just is that way. They just both exist because that's what you do in this sort of shared universe. And as you say, the episode where they took an episode out to spend the whole time in hell chatting to this demon and meeting Satan and so on was quite good fun. I always enjoy that side of the shared superhero universe for some reason, and I liked Invincible actually digging into their version of it and then pivoting pretty hard into space.
Yeah, exactly, And I'm sure all those plot threads will be picked up again at some point. The episode set in hell, it felt like the ending of a whole movie in its own right, as if we as the audience have just stumbled in to the cinema half an hour from the end of an entire film, but we haven't seen any of it before, which just kind of vaguely alluded to the backstory, the rivalry between the various demonic creatures in that episode, the kind of lore of their version of hell. It all seems consistent and thought through, even though it is just a kind of it's a one episode plot line line and we're kind of only catching the end of a story. Yeah, in that sense it's well done in that it feels consistent and it feels like there is a whole story behind each of these like characters that are sort of alluded to within this like one TV show.
Well, yeah, I mean, like one of the things that comes about as a result of the structure of this season, because they've got a whole episode in hell and then they've got like 3 solid episodes where they're just in space with a smaller group of supporting cast, is that a lot of characters who are in it quite a lot in the early seasons aren't really in it that much at all this year comparatively. Like there's the whole Guardians of the Globe, the sort of Justice League-esque team of like the Robots and Monster Girl and Triplicate and whoever else. They were in it a lot before, and this year they're barely in it at all, and I almost missed them, but it feels like they'll be back eventually.
Yeah, they had a couple of episodes pushing their plotline forwards. I get the feeling they'll be back in a future episode. Like, yeah, each one had like a sort of crucial piece of plot and characterization. Yeah, I guess with the Guardians of the Globe, there's the return of the alien invaders from another dimension, a different alien invasion, and that plotline's been picked up. Yeah, and so each episode kind of also feels like, yeah, it's moving its own film plot timeline forward. Like, again, there's the one with the criminals, again, with a whole series of different backgrounds. There's one of them's like a sort of cyborg type guy. One's a sort of person who transforms into a giant dragon using some combination of magic. Yeah, that felt like a consistent thing in its own right as well.
Yeah, it's impressive the way they all feel populated despite getting a relatively small chunk of the season. And yeah, that's one of the things this show does well. I think many years ago I compared it to Game of Thrones, and that's a bit of an ambitious comparison, but in terms of the sheer number of different corners of the universe they're vaguely trying to keep juggling, and impressively mostly succeeding. I still think it's not the weakest comparison in the world.
Yeah, and with the sense that it's all moving towards like one final place that'll bring it all together.
And speaking of Game of Thrones comparisons, they do sort of do the Game of Thrones thing at the finale this year, which was an interesting new approach, in that previous years the finale has basically been one long massive punch up, whereas this year the massive fight is in the penultimate episode, and then the finale is this sort of thoughtful epilogue where everyone's just a bit shell shocked by what happens in the finale. Well, in the penultimate episode fight.
Yeah, I guess it's like very much paying off that adventure in space storyline. I really get the sense that this TV show is about violence, and one of the big themes it's exploring is violence and the impact it has on people. It must be said this is an incredibly violent show, and there's a lot of blood, there's a lot of guts, and not done in so much a sort of over-the-top way that is kind of funny. Things like Happy Tree Friends or whatever, where it's the ultra-violence is played for laugh. It's sometimes disturbingly realistic. There's one bit, I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler, mid-season when Mark fights and one of the big villains who's called Conquest, and there's a bit of Conquest ripping out Mark's guts, and you do see individual organs come out in a sort of pretty medically accurate way. It is really quite gross and violent. So yeah, there's really a lot of violence in this, but I feel also there is this sense of it's exploring the impact it has on violence, and that, as you say, that final episode, which is basically everyone sort of reeling in shell shock after an incredibly violent scenes before it. Yeah, that really is kind of getting into the psychology of violence and the effect it has on you. And also in this season we see the amount of pressure that the burden is having on Mark as the violence he's experiencing builds up, and also things like Nolan's story, he's having to atone for the violent things he did in the past. So it is I think a theme that the show is very much exploring.
Yeah, in the penultimate episode, there's a big set piece towards the end, which is the way they sort of end the big fight, which I vaguely feel I shouldn't spoil. But it's the sort of thing that you see a bit on sort of shows about big zappy lasers in space or whatever, but they put a lot of time into really making it feel dramatic and impactful and like a really huge deal in the storyline. And I'm assuming you know the bit I mean.
Oh, yes, yeah. I know exactly what you're referring to. And yeah, I think it's worth not having it spoiled if you're watching the show. But yeah, I mean, it's a big plot moment, and also it's given the psychological weight it should have, and the impact on the characters. I mean, it's a show about sort of superheroes. It's got magic and people flying off to space, but in some ways it's much more psychologically realistic than, much more down-to-earth shows. I'm just thinking 24 by season 5 or 6, the amount of people that Jack has killed and the amount of violence and disturbing things he's been through, and it would have an effect on someone, but obviously it's just a sort of detective-y action show, so he just shrugs it off in the same way that James Bond doesn't really care all the people he's killed. But at this point, we're going to explore the emotional impact on Mark of the things that he's done. So in some ways it's and you can really feel that in even the ways that he kind of disassociates in conversations, has these anxiety dreams about mass death and destruction. It's very much focusing in on that psychological cost of violence.
Yeah, and in the final epilogue type episode, there's a few plot developments which are, a lot of it is kind of setting stuff up for next season, I guess. But it's both very interesting in terms of the plot development they've gone for, which does feel a bit more unique and interesting a direction to take the storyline in. Like, I'm sure a proper sci-fi hardcore would know what things they might be putting from here, but it's the sort of thing you don't see as much as just there's some evil aliens who might kill us. And the final scene or so, with the impact it has on Mark, again, during his final conversation in that episode, is quite emotionally intense. It's very well done. It does actually feel, even though it's a relatively quiet episode without that much big punching, it feels very impactful. It's a good ending.
Yeah, like I say, they really are bringing the emotional stakes, really digging into these characters, the relationships, and the psychological impact on them, and things like that. And it feels reminiscent of things that we've seen, such as like, the effects on Vietnam veterans, things like that, of the PTSD they experienced whilst in combat. Again, like, Mark, although his combat is like punching people with sort of Superman type abilities, but there is a psychological impact to this. There's, one bit when he has to kill a person who's been taken over by a sort of Gould-esque alien parasite creature, having to kill this person in order to stop like an alien invasion, again a third alien invasion. He has like psychological effects from this, and he doubts his morality, he doubts himself, he wishes there was another way. So it's emotionally rich in that sense.
No, it's another good season. I came away really impressed with this. I think it's better than last season. I think it's a good one. I think there's a couple of moments during some of the space stuff where I was a bit sort of don't massively care about some of these space characters as much as I do the Earth characters. Obviously, I'm invested in, Mark and his family, but the people they were travelling with who were not Mark, his dad, and his brother was a bit sort of, and these other people.
Yeah, I quite like Alan the Alien. We've been with him a few times, and he's kind of got a bit more of a sense of humour.
He's a good dude. He's a very straightforward and good dude among all these tortured people.
Yeah, and they introduce his girlfriend in this, played by Tatiana Maslany from Orphan Black and others. So, I guess they always get really good voice people in for this. But yeah, I get the feeling of like some of them like the old sage guy who's their sort of leader, space racer and things like that. They're more background characters, I suppose. They don't have the emotional resonancy, say, of like the characters slowly been with from the beginning. Like, the Guardians of the Globe, Cecil, obviously Mark's family, and some of the other extended people like that. A bit less of the college people as well this time. I guess something had to be cut to focus on this like space adventure.
But I think it did sort of work on a meta sense by the end, because you do get the sense of Mark having been away from Earth by episode 8, because you haven't seen the Earth characters since like episode 4.
Yeah. And it creates a sense of like this is important and things like that. Yeah, and obviously they do a good job of building up to the big space thing, about stressing like how dangerous it is and how also important it is. Also for a show about a main character who's called Invincible and who is like, a very powerful superhero. They do also do a good job of making sure there's always like emotional stakes and, physical stakes as well, in that as strong as Mark is, he's not as strong as the Viltrumite army.
Yeah.
Each member, seems to be about as powerful as Superman in their own right. So there is always a sense of stakes, and it did really feel like this is a big thing that they're doing. This is a big moment when they're pulling stuff together, when they're going off to space to fight, the series' big aliens. So because again, it feels like they're getting to a big moment. Yeah, I guess as you say, if this is the kind of the big middle of the story, I guess this is the kind of, again, what writers call, people study like John York and people like that call the cave. The main character faces a big challenge in the middle of the story. That definitely had that sort of vibe to it.
Yeah, it did definitely feel a bit, this is the end of the first half. We've come this far and now we are actually going to launch off in a new direction. Yeah, I have actually read this comic many years ago and I've forgotten a lot of the detail, so I'm excited to be reminded what happens in the remaining seasons.
Yeah, I'm certainly excited by what happened this season, and I'm very excited to see what happens next. I think it ends on a really good note, so yeah, hopefully we don't have to wait too long for the next season. They seem to be reliably-ish doing one a year, so maybe not too long.
Yeah, there was quite a big pause between season 1 and 2, but after that there seems to have been a bit of a, I guess it's been successful enough for them to really, pour some cash in and invest in having it ready once a year. So yeah, hopefully next spring more Invincible. Okay, and last up today, it's Alivens Vs Avengers, a 4-issue miniseries that came out from Marvel Comics towards the end of last year, in which the iconic Xenomorphs meet, the Avengers. Set in a future Marvel universe where many of our favourite heroes have gotten old and many of our favourite young heroes are now a bit older, the aliens have turned up despite the Black Panther's attempts to head them off, and now our heroes are the only chance the world has to survive this attack, but shockingly, they may not succeed. We have read this miniseries by podcast favourite Jonathan Hickman and artist Esad Vibic. Alastair, what did you think?
So this was, entertaining to read, and there's some great fights and things like that. Obviously, Jonathan Hickman's a good writer and does a good plot line. I felt there was a sort of tonal mismatch, maybe, between the two. I guess they're putting together two big sci-fi franchises, now both owned by Disney. And I kind of feel the tone wasn't so perfectly aligned in the sense that the Aliens stories, especially when they work well, are usually quite dark and grim. And Marvel has such a range of tones. But yeah, they don't tend to go usually as dark and grim as the Alien stories do, especially stories, I guess, that maybe have Spider-Man or Black Panther in them. There's a sense of like, yeah, it's usually turning quite different. So I felt there was a tonal mismatch there, but that didn't stop me enjoying it, just maybe not enjoying it as much as you would think like Aliens plus Avengers equals.
I think you could do something like that if you were doing, I don't know, Alien versus Wolverine or something. You could probably go full darkness then if you wanted and have Wolverine hunting down an alien in a darkened spaceship and stabbing it repeatedly.
That is a good point.
They've gone for Alien versus Avengers here, and it's very much just sort of big, broad spectrum sci-fi adventure. It's not about, the dark horror of facing one alien. It's about the massive cosmic threat of the aliens and the Avengers trying to defeat it on this sort of macro level. I think Hickman's in a bit of maybe a slightly more playful mood than we sometimes see him. He's still throwing around his trademark big, dramatic ideas that sound semi-incomprehensible, which lends itself quite well to lots of like big sci-fi set pieces. Along with a bit of deep-cut alien mythology, I enjoyed seeing him actually try to weave in the Michael Fassbender synthetic as villain, which is ambitious and something most people are just trying to forget. But no, Jonathan Hickman's like, no, I'm going to make this work. And you have to respect it on some level.
Yeah, absolutely. I did not expect there to be this much alien lore in Aliens vs Avengers, picking up bits from Prometheus and Alien Covenant. One thing certain is that Jonathan Hickman chose probably the best bit of Alien Covenant. Not a great film, but yeah, the bit when all the bombs get dropped and the sort of black goo released, it is kind of cool to see that rendered again. Yeah, it was an interesting space opera plot line that works in that sense of like, this is a big superhero story with big heroes and villains. Obviously, there's an enormous range of Marvel characters to draw on, including X-Men, mutants, as well as Captain America, Hulk, Captain Marvel, Miles Morales, Spider-Man, Tony Stark, Iron Man. God, I'm sure there's more, Black Panther. There's a lot of them, so there's, considering it's only like 4 issues, he does go through like a lot of characters, settings, and some big set pieces. So I guess we're dealing with things in a very much big space opera adventure style thing.
Well, yeah, it's like every issue seems to go to a different setting and have a different sort of big confrontation. So it's not really, trying to get deep into individual horror moments. It's very big. There's like stuff at the end where they go to the mutant outpost on Mars, obviously, and discover that Mr. Sinister has been doing experiments with the aliens, which is another fun moment.
Yeah, inevitably that was going to happen, yeah.
Clearly, Hickman enjoys spending time with Mr. Sinister. There's a certain amount of glee in the way he writes that character, which, again, is quite tonally strange in a story about aliens eating people's faces, but nonetheless quite entertaining.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense in that he's a character who experiments with genetics and splicing genes together, and obviously the aliens are the ultimate predator, so you can see why Mr. Sinister would like that. I mean, the fact that it's got all these like different settings and like different groups of characters, I think is kind of why it's so fun to read, in that there's a sense of momentum. It's always like moving forward, like characters are going to go here, they're going to have a big fight with some aliens, and then some of them will escape and they'll go on to a next location. There'll be another group of characters and another slight different setup with the whole thing of the aliens spreading and killing people. And that sort of sense of forward momentum, like always moving towards another location, another big fight, is entertaining to read. And also the fact that like, because this is clearly obviously outside any kind of main Avengers timeline, they also don't mind killing off like serious high level people, which does mean there is a real sense of stake for each issue. People like Tony Stark, for example, are killed. Yeah,
it did actually, at times when I was reading it, remind me a bit of that Marvel Zombies show, except, and I cannot stress this enough, better.
Yeah.
Because Marvel Zombie Show was alright-ish at best, whereas this is actually quite good and fun.
Yeah. This is fun and entertaining to read because Jonathan Hickman's a good writer and can tell a really good story. There definitely is a sort of zombie-ish sense to that. Partly, I think the way that the aliens are handled is a bit more like a sort of zombie type thing, and that their power comes in their numbers in this. There are vast numbers of them, and they sort of swarm towards the Avengers. I guess because an individual alien isn't so much of a match for the Hulk or Iron Man, but there are large numbers of them and they swarm. And also you have the whole thing of the facehuggers implanting people, taking them down, or turning them to the aliens' cause or the alien side in that way. So I did feel that there was a very zombie-ish thing to the aliens. And also the fact, which very true to all alien media and the films, is that the thing about the aliens is you can't communicate with them, you can't reason with them, they just come at you to try to kill you. And same to a zombie, you can't argue with a zombie horde, you just have to fight or run, and it's the same dynamic here.
Well, yeah, the zombie horde or even like plague, there's a certain amount of, another city has fallen to the virus type vibe going on. They're just this thing moving across the world.
Yeah, and also this sense of like, because they said this, I guess, towards the end of this story or this war, this sense of, they're the last surviving humans and the human race is on the verge of going extinct because of this outbreak, and they have to take big momentous decisions because it's not just their survival that hinges on this, it's the survival of the human race.
Yeah, and it does give it a certain sense of drama. As I say, it's not the most po-faced, serious, holy shit story in the world. I think Hickman definitely in a slightly more playful mood than he has been when doing things like House of X, but yeah, it does give it a sense of, as you say, stakes and drama.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Again, the sort of sense of a big sci-fi epic adventure. I also did like the nod to Krakoa, was also mentioned as well, I guess, in reference to Hickman's X-Men times.
Yeah, a bit of Krakoa action. In Marvel continuity, Krakoa has ended a while ago, but this is Hickman's alternate future, a glorious world where Krakoa never ended. Yeah, and Asad Vivich's art is really cool. It's a very good sort of meeting point for the sort of, I guess, comic Avengers versus movie Aliens, this sort of weighty painted art, and it looks really good. He does do a good alien.
Yeah, no, I thought the art was really, really good, and things like that. Again, the fight scenes and stuff, it comes across really well, slightly abstracted style that kind of captures the chaos and bloodshed of a big fight. And also, I just thought it was, looked quite different to some of the superhero stuff we've read before. In some ways, almost reminiscent of Descender, which I think used watercolours, whereas this is, again, there's a sort of sketch-like quality to the art that is a bit abstract that I certainly really liked.
Yeah, I think Descender maybe had a few more slightly sharp digital edges, which I guess works quite well because it was about robots. But yeah, this is it's definitely a similar sort of painted vibe.
Yeah, I thought the art was really, really nice. Yeah, and captured like horror of the aliens well, especially as in the films and things like that. The aliens are the scariest when they're sort of just glimpsed out of the corner of your eye or flashing by quickly, or you see a bit of them. And obviously that's in a film when the film can move on. This has been like a graphic novel. You can linger in any bit as long as you like, but using that slightly abstract style gives you that same hint of you're just capturing like a bit of the horror, looking at the whole thing as incomprehensibly awful. You're just catching like a sideways glance of it, which in some ways is scarier because it's what's implied rather than what's shown.
Although also, the other way Hickman is amping up the threat is, as he has done in other things he's done, by way of the good old-fashioned info dump, Like there's a bit where he just tries to put across the scale of the alien threat just by telling you how mathematically impossible it would be to escape it.
Yeah.
Just in terms of the speed with which they can colonise your planet.
Yeah, exactly. Which is it's quite scary, setting up the stakes right from the beginning. I suppose it's one of those things like, it's only like 4 issues and there's quite, a universe worth of stories, so it does rely on, to a certain degree, on some exposition, like these are the things you need to know. Assuming the fact that you already know who the Avengers are, and also like things where the aliens, such as like the acid for blood and they reproduce by face huggers and chest bursters and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, there were parts where I was a bit sort of, I think my alien mythology knowledge might actually not quite be up to the level it would need to be to fully appreciate every panel of this, but I got it well enough. I recognised Michael Fassbender.
Yeah. That was, again, nodding towards things I guess people have seen recently. There is a whole series of Alien comics and Alien versus Predator comics. As far as I'm aware, they do have built up a substantial amount of alien lore, which I guess they decided not to draw on here. I guess, as we said about comics that we've discussed quite a bit recently, especially the DC ones, and like, I get the feeling this is relying on you, it's drawing on people who've seen the films. So basically, like, right, the deal with this character and that character. Like, we're going to put up ones from recent films, like Black Panther and people like that, up front and centre, so that because the deal with them is we don't have to explain it and stuff. And similar to the Alien, we're going to draw on recent Alien lore, not things like Queen Mothers and Hive Empresses and stuff, which I believe are from the Alien comics.
I think there's definitely a goal for this to be a sort of easy, accessible, perennial seller. But anyone who, as you say, knows a bit about Aliens and a bit about Avengers can just pick up and have a good time. Yeah, it's not meant to be issues 60 to 63 in some massive ongoing series.
Yeah, and it's one of those things like it's just two things I like together. Maybe I didn't enjoy it as much as, sometimes you think that like two things you like would go well together, but also sometimes they really don't. Like I think I've said before, like I don't want chocolate ice cream on my pizza. But they do go well together here because they're both stories about sort of epic space adventures, and that's what this delivers.
Yeah, no, this is fun. I think we've read some Hickman stuff in the past, which has been, genuinely excellent, amazing. And as a result, when you read something which is merely a good, solid, entertaining story, you're a bit sort of, this wasn't a masterpiece that is going to top my best of year list. And it feels somehow disappointing. But, this is still a good, solid read. Enjoyed it.
I guess that's the problem with being a great storyteller or very accomplished in your medium, which is people hold you to a higher standard.
God damn it.
that's all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please leave us a review in your podcatcher of choice. And then you can visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and read short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you want to read even shorter written pieces by me and Alastair, you can follow us on social media. On pretty sure it's Facebook and Blue Sky, but I'm sure Alastair will correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's right.
Oh, hey, nailed it. And yep, if you like that, then why not follow me on various platforms, primarily Blue Sky, where I'm nickbryan.com, or Instagram, where I'm nickbryan.com, but with the word dot. And then you can hear me talk mostly about my self-published comics.
You can also find me on Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok by searching for Alastair Ball. You can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com, find my theatre reviews at everythingtheatre.com, or find my other writing at The Post, my newsletter, via any of the links in my social media profiles. And after all that, you can come back here in 2 weeks when we will be doing superhero action again, but this time on a smaller scale, defending New York from crime in the second season of Daredevil Born Again. And then we will be trying to escape from a hallway that loops infinitely with slight variations in the film of Exit 8. Join us in 2 weeks' time to find out what we made of those. Until then, goodbye.
Bye-bye.